Good morning, everyone. We're going to give Zoom a few seconds to fill the room. All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this meeting on the Committee on the Revision of the Penal Code, which is now in session. I am Mike Romano, committee chair and host for today's program. At the outset, I want to share news that Judge Stelton Henderson, our colleague, has notified me last month that he will be resigning, or he has resigned from the committee for health reasons. As we all know, Judge Henderson is a living legend, and serving with him on this committee has been an honor and a privilege. He will really be impossible to fully replace, and we will miss him. With that note, let's take a quick roll call. Assembly Member Bryan is not here, but he will be joining shortly. Judge Espinoza? I'm here. Judge Moreno?
Here.
And Senator Skinner cannot join us, but we have a quorum and can proceed, and we will. We have a busy agenda today. We have invited more than a dozen witnesses to discuss issues at the intersection of poverty and criminal law. Particularly alternatives to arrest for low-level street crimes associated with poverty, welfare fraud, and criminal fines and fees. We'll also hear updates from committee staff, including proposals discussed at our previous committee meetings, and take public comment. We'll also take a couple of short breaks along the way, including lunch around 12:30. Today's meeting is about some of the intersections between poverty and criminal law. According to the Census Bureau, California has the highest rate of poverty in the whole country, and much of our criminal legal system is intertwined with that problem. We're going to cover three topics today: something called law enforcement assisted diversion, usually known as by the acronym LEAD. Then we'll also talk about prosecutions for welfare fraud. And then third, we'll talk about court-ordered fines and fees in criminal cases. The topics we're exploring today are areas where I feel our recommendations can make significant impact, but they are, of course, just some of the many important issues in the area. A few brief words about each of the issues. LEAD is a new approach towards law enforcement intervention in low-level offenses. We'll hear more about it, of course, but under LEAD, many people who would not be arrested for these offenses, but it would instead be steered towards effective treatment with the assistance of case managers. There are more than 100,000 arrests every year for misdemeanor drug offenses in California. And like the rest of the country, we are looking for a more effective strategy. Research, some of which we'll be hearing about shortly, shows that LEAD may be one of the most effective interventions. Next, we'll discuss welfare fraud. Research shows that a disproportionate majority of people prosecuted for welfare fraud are poor women of color. This raises familiar questions about racial disparities in the criminal system and whether the tremendous expense and consequences of criminal prosecution is appropriate or effective responses to these types of cases. Finally, we'll discuss fines and fees imposed by courts after a criminal conviction. California has made tremendous progress in this area, especially with the help of Senator Skinner. However, evidence shows that continuing to require people to pay money as part of the criminal conviction does not improve public safety and might actually increase recidivism. So those are the issues that we'll discuss today. That's a preview of a docket, and I look forward to exploring these topics with everyone here today. With that, let's get started. And we'll begin with a presentation from Professor Eileen Malm, Professor of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Cal State University at Long Beach. Dr. Malm's presentation is about an evaluation she led of the LEAD program in California. We'll hear from Dr. Malm for about 7 minutes and then have Q&A. Dr. Malm, take it away. You're on mute. There we go.
Thank you so much for having me. Once again, my name is Dr. Eileen Malm, and I'm from California State University, Long Beach, and I'm pleased to be here. My colleague, Dr. Dina Perrone, and I were brought into LEAD to lead the pilot evaluation results in California in two different sites, so two different pilot sites. One was in South Los Angeles, North Beach, North Long Beach, the corridor there, and the other was in the San Francisco Mission and Tenderloin District. So I'm going to take a few minutes just to walk you through some of the findings that we had and then answer any questions that you might have about LEAD. We did 3 evaluations in both of these sites. One was an outcome evaluation, and this is where we primarily looked at recidivism. So new arrests and also process cases, convictions, and so on. We also did a cost evaluation to see if LEAD was cost effective and if we had some criminal legal system savings. We also did a process evaluation, and this was really, my colleague Dr. Prone led this, and this was looking at how the programs were rolled out in both of our sites and what some of the successes and challenges of each of these programs were. So just in a nutshell here, this is for the LA LEAD. Again, this is the sort of Compton and Long Beach corridor. Our LEAD participants experienced 5 times less felony arrests and 5 times less filed felony cases as people in our comparison group. I'm not going to go into detail about how we made the comparison group, but I'm open to questions if you have. We used a lot of statistical controls there. Another successful finding, our participants in LEAD spent about 4 times less time on probation as people in the comparison group, and our misdemeanor arrests were about 1.5 times higher. So we got a little stronger results with felony arrests in LA and felony convictions, which we were really happy about. So was the program, but we also had effects in probation and misdemeanor. When we look at the costs for the LEAD, these are the criminal legal system cost savings for LEAD. So this is pre the individuals that were in LEAD pre their enrollment and post their enrollment, 1 year before, 1 year after. And we also compare that to our system as usual comparison group, 1 year before, 1 year after. We find that our costs went down for our LEAD group by a little bit, but they went up significantly for our comparison group. And this was a significant finding for us. It's important to note here that these don't include jail costs. So these are underestimations, dramatic underestimations. We just couldn't get the jail data in time for the evaluation. So now let's turn to San Francisco and the outcome evaluation. We had successful results in San Francisco as well when we looked at recidivism. Felony arrests were about 2.5 times higher for our comparison group than our LEAD clients. Misdemeanor arrests were a whopping 6 times higher for our comparison group, and our felony filed cases were 3.5 times higher for our comparison group. So just to recap, we have successful recidivism outcomes for LEAD in both LA and San Francisco. And then when we look at the costs, we see similar results to LA, where our LEAD costs for our LEAD group 1 year prior, 1 year post went down significantly, and our comparison group went up a bit. And these are significant differences across groups. Once again, these don't include jail costs. Again, it was just hard to get the jail data at this time. If you look at how much LEAD actually costed for the case management and legal services, you get some differentiation. And we're going to compare this to the Seattle LEAD program, which is where LEAD started. In LA, it cost about $573 per client per month for case management and legal services. In Seattle, it was about $899. In San Francisco, it was a little more, and those were primarily pushed by higher case management costs in San Francisco. But if you were to think back to our cost savings, our costs for LEAD were managed by our cost savings for the year after LEAD. What we also did is we weren't just interested in some of these more tangible outcomes like recidivism and cost, but we also were interested in how the LEAD participants how they perceived not only their case managers, but really, we thought, interestingly, the law enforcement that was enrolling them in the program. Because remember, law enforcement assisted diversion, it starts with police on the street that are diverting individuals pre-arrest. These are really, really strong. I can't emphasize enough how strong these results are. So we asked the clients a series of procedural justice questions. Did the officer treat you fairly? Did they allow questions? Did they explain LEAD fully? Did they not judge you? Were they helpful? And so on. And we found these are results from our LA site, but our San Francisco site was just a tiny bit lower, but still very strong. I mean, you're getting almost 100% agreement here that the officer was procedurally just with the individuals that ended up going into lead. And if you were to compare this to other research that shows how officers are engaging with individuals and when they're asked about procedural justice question, you're getting maybe 60, 70% agreement here. So these are much, much stronger. So it speaks to how LEAD and this entree into this diversion program from law enforcement officers really seems to suit the clients as well. And then just to wrap up, our process evaluation, so definitely last but not least, really tells us two different stories. The way that the South LA, North Long Beach LEAD site was implemented, the way it was rolled out, was really with fidelity to the LEAD Seattle model. And what that means is that they stuck very, very closely to the way LEAD was rolled out in Seattle. They trained very invested law enforcement officers. That was key to their success. They had excellent case managers, and their project management was really invested as well. They also brought the LEAD Seattle Training Bureau down to give training often. The San Francisco LEAD site did differ there, and they failed to get early police investment because they really rolled out to the entire police force instead of choosing individual officers, and they failed to do harm reduction training, most likely because it was difficult to train the entire police force instead of just the officers that were going to be offering lead. So that really was the big difference with the LA and the San Francisco site. But just to wrap up, strong results in both our outcome and our cost benefit analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Malm. That was very helpful. Just a couple of quick questions. First, I want to recognize Assemblymember Bryan has joined us. Let the record reflect. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. Just want to make sure that I understand correctly. The effects that we're talking about, especially the recidivism, obviously they'll have fewer arrests for the immediate intervention because that's the whole point of LEAD. You're not counting that as one less arrest. Is that correct?
No, we aren't. So we were sure to not only take that arrest that they were diverted from out of our calculations, but we also took the corresponding arrest that the comparison group individual would have been arrested from the calculations.
Made that. And then can you explain where the costs do come from? Like you said, I understand that they do not include jail, which I appreciate, but where do they come from?
They are police costs of arrest. So we use a method that was developed by some economists at RAND to estimate what your average investigation and police arrest costs are for both misdemeanor and felony charges. And then when we go to filed cases, it would be the legal costs. So the prosecution and the defense costs to either go to court or to deal with arraignment in a filed felony or misdemeanor charge.
And then my last question, and I'll open it to the rest of the folks, is as you probably well know, you don't usually see these types of effects in many law enforcement interventions. Why hasn't this been taken up? So I'm just asking you to guess.
I mean, that's the $1 million question. Part of it is even though Seattle LEAD had very strong effects, and we did as well, there haven't been a lot of other research projects that have done it. And there has been critique of these aren't randomized controlled trials, which are very, very difficult to do in the criminal legal system, as I'm sure you're well aware of. So there are critiques of how comparison groups are chosen. The biggest one is that willingness to change cannot be controlled for. So you could have individuals that are going into LEAD and your comparison group, you can't balance those groups. You can balance them on ethnicity, you can balance them on criminal history and on gender and everything else, but we can't really have that volunteerism, that willingness to change. So that's the methodological challenge. I also think time and the context of when this program started to gain some momentum, and it coincided with our evaluation, our report to the legislature was released January 1st, 2020. And then COVID hit and things changed completely. So I think any momentum that could have been gained was lost because of just when we were releasing these results.
And is it continued in Seattle?
It has, yes, very successfully.
Judge Espinoza.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of observations. One is LEAD continues to function in the in the North Long Beach, South LA corridor. However, it was substantially reduced funding. We continue to house the folks that we housed. We have a limited number of permanent supportive housing spots in that corridor. We also expanded the LEAD model, but not with the same financial support, to Hollywood, East LA, and my memory is failing me, but this was before I left. So the program continues to operate, but it doesn't operate with the same robust outcomes, I don't think, because of the lack of significant funding. I just want to say that the thing that impressed me most about the LEAD model when we went to Seattle, came back and established it in Los Angeles, was the collaboration between the case managers and the law enforcement officers. There are weekly meetings between these two groups to talk about individuals. And we were lucky, we were fortunate in both Long Beach PD and the Sheriff's Department that they identified, and the doctor identified this as a problem in San Francisco. They identified specific officers who would be lead officers or deputies. And everybody got to know everybody out in the community. And it would not be uncommon for the police to have an encounter with one of our participants, and rather than do anything that would not be harm reduction, they would call the case manager and say, hey, you got to come out here. You know, so-and-so is not behaving well. And it really became a very close relationship between the service providers and law enforcement. So it's a viable model, but it takes a lot of work and it takes some resources. Thanks.
That's very helpful. Dr. Malm, if I'm not correct, I understood your concern about the way that the San Francisco didn't follow the Seattle model, but if my recollection serves, San Francisco did see similar, if not better, results, regardless of the fact that it wasn't as individualized as it seems like it was in LA and Seattle.
Yeah, similar results, better in some areas and less so in others.
Got it. All right. Unless anybody has any questions right away, Dr. Malm, if you can stay for our next panel, I don't want to interfere too much with your day, but we're going to have 3 panelists to talk about LEAD. If you can stay, that we would welcome your continued participation, especially for the Q&A that we'll have afterwards, but I'd like to keep things going. So feel free to stay or not, depending on your schedule. We'd love to have you. So as we get into our panel discussions, at the outset, I want to thank all of our panelists today for their insights. As always, each panelist will have 5 minutes to make opening remarks, and we'll reserve the rest of our time for Q&A. Please know, panelists, that if you've given us a written submission, we've read it. So in your opening remarks, please move quickly to the high points so we can move on to the conversation, which is obviously the most important and most productive part of our meeting. With that said, I'd like to introduce our panel on LEAD, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. We're hearing from experts and others who have had direct experience with these programs. Our panelists are Erica Shaheen, please correct me if I'm mispronouncing your name, Director of LEAD for the Los Angeles Office of Diversion and Reentry. Captain Jeffrey Diedrich, Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. Brendan Cox, Director of Policing Strategies at LEAD National Support Bureau. Doug Halbert, City Prosecutor for Long Beach. Ms. Shaheen.
And Mike, before we get started, Captain Diedrich hasn't joined us yet. We're trying to make sure he can, but I think we can get started. I just wanted to mention that at the outset.
Thank you, Tom. Ms. Shaheen. We'll begin with you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about our LA County LEAD program. Since 2017, we've served over 470 participants across 3 LEAD sites. As Judge Espinosa mentioned, it's the South LA North Long Beach site that Dr. Malm reported on, East Los Angeles, and Hollywood. The good news is we recently received AB 109 funding. Are you having a hard time hearing me? No? Okay.
A little bit. I'm getting old.
Yeah, no worries. I'll speak up. So we recently received AB 109 funding to expand LEAD in LA County. And once that's fully implemented, we'll be able to serve 1,000 people across 9 to 10 sites with multiple law enforcement jurisdictions. The population in LA County Lead is 36% Latinx, 33% Black, 27% white, and about 1% Asian Pacific Islander and Native American. The median age is 48 years old, 57% are female, 38% are male, and 4% identify as trans or gender non-conforming. The vast majority of LA Lead participants are experiencing unsheltered homelessness and are also disconnected from the traditional care system and have been arrested multiple times. A typical participant that we see here in LA might be somebody who's sleeping near a gas station or another business, using drugs. We tend to get referrals for those people due to complaint-oriented calls, so that business owner would call law enforcement, and then law enforcement has the opportunity to ask them to move on, to arrest. Lead is intended to be an off-ramp for that cycle, given that arrest doesn't do much. Even if they are taken to jail, they are right back in that same situation a few days later. So once somebody is in Lead, they receive long-term harm reduction-based case management services. Our participants here in LA also have a spectrum of housing resources through ODR's housing portfolio, includes interim housing. We recently got funding for motel vouchers, and even more permanent housing subsidies than we had with the original site. Not enough ever, but we have some. Some of the things I wanted to highlight about the case management services in Lead that really differentiate it from other services available here in LA is that we commit to participants for the long term. So even like our first site was grant funded, ODR has committed to continue to serve those folks and even all of our expansion sites indefinitely, because we realize it takes a long-term commitment to make real changes. That also means that case managers can build an authentic, trusting relationship with participants, which in my mind is the secret sauce, because many of the folks that we get in Lead are very service fatigued by a system of care that has let them down repeatedly. Lead case managers also have small caseloads, 20 people or less. That's really different than almost any other program here in LA. And this allows them to work with people in an intensive, tailored way, which is really going to help address the root causes of why somebody is getting arrested repeatedly. And then there's an entire team of people working together of to address why somebody has law enforcement contact. So that's our office at ODR, case managers, law enforcement, prosecution partners coming together every 2 weeks to problem solve. Another thing that feels very special about Lead is that it helps our participants navigate an extraordinarily complex legal system here in LA County. It helps participants start to do things like report to probation. Many people, when they come to Lead, don't even know if they're on probation or not. Clear open warrants, deal with citations. This clears a pathway so that people can actually start engaging in more traditional services without the fear of arrest. A couple of recommendations I wanted to highlight. I've been working on Lead since 2018. When I first started, the program was very focused on diverting narcotics charges. Now in LA County, the DA doesn't file on misdemeanor drug or sex work charges. So some of what I've heard from law enforcement and other partners that it might be helpful to have opportunities to divert things like citations that many of our unhoused residents are getting caught up in. Those citations can really set someone back on the ultimate goal of getting housed, because it ends up going on their credit, which many landlords will then not accept them. So even if our program is providing housing subsidies, we face issues in the commercial real estate market. So overall, I think an encouragement for expanded diversion opportunities based on the needs of what's happening in the local Lead site. And then related to that, we really seen that Lead policies need to be flexible enough to allow individual sites to be quick to respond to nuances in the community, and also rapid changes that happen in policy and justice system. When we first started Lead in 2017, there were only 6 or 7 charges that could be an arrest diversion. And as we all know, during COVID, the way policing was happening on the streets changed, zero bail, and other changes made it so those diversion charges actually weren't that relevant for Lead anymore. And then some things related to funding is we really recommend a long-term commitment to funding operations and funding long-term intensive case management services. There's been a lot of recent funding for one-time infrastructure costs, especially for a program or time-limited grants. For a program like Lead, where we're really working with folks who've been, have decades of trauma and have been disconnected from a service system for decades, a more long-term investment is really what's needed.
I'm just going to cut you off there just because I want to make sure that we get to everybody else. Hopefully during Q&A, we can get to your the recommendations are really just for everybody's notice, the highlights. So we do want to get to that too. But Captain Diedrich, if you could give us 5 minutes, that would be helpful, and we'll get to Q&A afterwards.
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me.
Good morning.
And I probably won't take the whole 5 minutes, but what I'd like to say is, so I'm the captain of what's called Community Partnerships Bureau. And it used to be our old COPS Bureau, which was the Community Oriented Policing. The name was changed, so we're now Community Partnerships Bureau. And I oversee our Homeless Outreach Services team, which I created as a lieutenant back in 2015. I also oversee our mental evaluation team, all of our community-oriented policing teams, and then a myriad of other things here. I have over 11 units at my bureau. I was actually in the original meeting with the LA County Sheriff with the LEAD program, and I selected the 2 deputies that ended up doing it here from our program. And so one, I can say I have tremendous support for the LEAD program. I think done when it's done the right way, it enhances community safety by helping such a population that's underserved and really diverts them and takes them down a path, because I was able to see some of the successes. And so the amazing work that was done by the deputies. And I think where we're at today is we're not funded for any of this. And so at my bureau, I have the 2 deputies are still here. They're attached to the program a little bit, but they're on the Homeless Outreach Services team. But I think my biggest concern going forward, and we have executive support from the top, you know, from the sheriff to our chiefs, is we have 0 funding for the LEAD program here at our bureau to do it. And I think one, the deputies, because we're blessed that the original deputies are here, one, they're ambassadors for the program, and they're able to show the other deputies, you know, how the system works. And it gives you organizational buy-in because you have leaders within the ranks that are supporting the program, that's ultimately serving those people who would have been, you know, going to jail and not finding the path to success. So I think with the law enforcement assisted diversion program, hopefully somewhere we can find a way to actually fund the deputies. I've been in a few meetings with our previous chief and our new chief, where they've actually even said they have 100% support for the program. And then they said, well, what do we do if we don't have any funding for it? And so I think that's our primary concern. Internally, the program works. And I think when we're all together, the way that it's done with the case management and the referrals, it can be tremendously successful. And so I think especially here at this bureau, you know, we kind of had a quasi plan of if it was to go again, what would we do? And I think the organizational buy-in is kind of where we started, in the sense that our deputies with their expertise, especially those that work in the Homeless Outreach Services team, I mean, they've had 70,000 contacts and never made an arrest and never used force. And they come across people, so they're basically doing a diversion program on their own. And so to have them come into the fold, I think would be tremendously successful. And then those deputies have developed credibility within the ranks at the station. So once if we were part of this bigger program, they would then be able to say and be the ambassadors to do the training and say, if you came across this situation where someone was in this criteria, we can then help you with this program. I'm trying to be concise, but I truly think organizational buy-in amongst the deputies, because at my rank and above, we can all say it's great. But if we don't have buy-in from our field personnel that are coming across that vulnerable population day in and day out, it's not going to be successful. I believe we have a window of opportunity where it can be, and it could be right now, because deputies are thirsting for a way to enhance community safety and serve those that are in crisis. We have some specialized training. Matter of fact, we just did it for the League of Cities yesterday on our crisis stabilization model, which is called ROAR. We integrate that and it teaches deputies to recognize windows of opportunity. And we spoke about yesterday, we can infuse the LEAD program into that crisis stabilization training as a window of opportunity to enhance public safety and also connect those who need it with those services. And so I think with us, the easiest thing to express would be funding because we don't have it. And I think to have those dedicated lead deputies, at least at the beginning, to have those specialized lead deputies that you're using one as your PR arm, your PIOs, your training arm to train the multitude. I think we have 5,000 deputies working patrol. If we had them do in-service trainings and things like that, it broadens the message on a global perspective. And one, it'll get organizational buy-in at the field. And two, it'll enhance the progress of the team. Because I think it's truly, the LEAD program is amazing. And I think we do have that window to take it forward. So I'm just hoping that we're able to do it. But we're so shorthanded, and without the funding, I don't know how we can do it.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll get back to you. I really appreciate that, Captain Diedrich. Mr. Cox?
So good morning, everybody. Glad that I can be here. I'm Brendan Cox. I'm with the Lead Sport Bureau. I've been with the Bureau for about 6.5 years now. Before that, I was with the Albany, New York Police Department. I was the chief there when we implemented LEAD back in 2016. I've had the pleasure of being in LA and San Francisco. I've been with California since the beginning of when you guys implemented. Thrilled to work with all of you guys very closely and with the results. LEAD is in about 85 jurisdictions in about 20 states across the US. We're about to go international this year. Very proud of the results. LEAD, the way LEAD operates is really meant to address the fact that the criminal legal system as it exists, as it's no secret to anybody on this call, that the criminal legal system just can't address people with unmet behavioral health needs, people who live in poverty, people that are homeless. The criminal legal system doesn't address those things. And especially repeat offenders. The simple fact of the matter is that we can do better by diverting folks out of the system and into a long-term system of care based on a harm reduction platform where we can provide case managers that can really work with folks on a long-term basis, where folks can really stay with people for however long they need our services. And that's what our lead case managers do best, really meeting them in a person-centered approach. And the reason why LEAD has really worked and really continued to grow is because we've continued to kind of change as we've needed to change. When LEAD started in Seattle, it was to address racial disparities within the system. We continue to make sure we do that. And when LEAD first started, and really when California first started to do this, we really were looking at more of a pre-arrest diversion initiative where when officers had probable cause to make an arrest, they could, instead of arrest, call that case manager and make that diversion. Social contact referrals, as you guys had written into law, those were part of the initiative, but we were all still kind of trying to figure that out. Social contact referrals were really that just basic offer for help without having to have an arrest situation. What we've learned is that social contact referrals work really, really well for officers and other members of the criminal legal system. Officers and deputies really like those. They work well, especially because of the fact that, especially when we came across COVID, we had a lot of situations where officers weren't making arrests anyways, weren't even in situations where they had probable cause, and we're staying away from that. But what we've learned is we've been able to have it to where we made sure that social contact referrals didn't turn LEAD into a social services program. Not that we don't need social services program, but social contact referrals kept with the same group of folks that we were meaning to divert for arrest diversions. And those were folks that were having a lot of contact with the system, folks that were being arrested 30, 40, 50 times that we knew that we did not only couldn't fix with the criminal legal system, we were actually causing more harm. We were actually creating more trauma. So we've been able to keep that same body of group. And then after George Floyd, we included a community referral that we call Let Everyone Advance with Dignity. Los Angeles is doing very well, where we invite the community in to be able to make referrals. And again, we've been able to keep with that same group. One of the major things that we've been able to do, and your guys, the results of your evaluation and evaluations across the country have shown, is that engagement with participants, meeting them where they're at, has been one of the things that have led to improvement, increase in public safety, decrease in problematic behavior by having that harm reduction public person-centered approach. Officer engagement is key, and officer engagement looks a little bit different in each place. Our goal, my goal as a former chief of police, is to have this for every officer in every department. We're in departments that have as few as 10 people. We're in departments as big as the LA County Sheriff's Department, which is one of the largest police departments in the country. So we know that that's going to look different in each place because it's not going to happen overnight. So when Los Angeles started out, it made sense to have it a couple of deputies to start this initiative off, get this buy-in, and you guys did a fantastic job, and you guys are continuing to do a fantastic job in LA County and LA City in getting this. But it is our intent to have this grow across the board. There were a lot of reasons why, despite the evaluation and the results in San Francisco, that it didn't work. Officer buy-in was a key, but it wasn't just because, and in my opinion, it wasn't because of the fact that they had it be precinct-wide. It was actually because officers didn't know they were diverting into lead. They were handing somebody off to someone and not being told they were going to lead. They were being told, we're going to get them something, you're just not going to know about that. So one of the key things about lead is the follow-up between case managers, police officers, prosecutors, public defenders. The judge knows this. He sat in an operation work groups. He knows what those look like. The fact that police officers are going to hear back from case managers, here's what's happening with this individual, here's how they're doing, here's what's happening with them, no matter how incremental the change is, here's what's happening. So police officers like to get information back. I see it's my time. They need to hear back what's happening with the individuals that are changing. They need to know that lead is way different than other things that are happening. There are plenty of other great initiatives, but lead is that change that's way different than what officers are used to seeing in this harm reduction platform.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you for respecting the time. We want to drill down with everybody in a more discussion format. This is really just to tee things up. Mr. Halbert, is that how you pronounce your name?
Yes, Halbert. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly. If you take 5 minutes, that'd be great.
Great. I apologize if there's background noise. I'm actually at a hotel and I'm trying to share my screen. I have a very quick presentation. I'll be less than 5 minutes.
Perfect.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Great. So we've already talked about the LA Long Beach lead pilot. So I'm just going to give you from my take, the prosecutor's take. And by the way, I am the elected city prosecutor from Long Beach. Long Beach is one of 13 cities in California that has its own prosecuting agency. So misdemeanors in Long Beach are not handled by the district attorney. They're handled by the city. The same thing in Los Angeles, Pasadena, and a number of other cities. Number one takeaway, we felt that the lack of technology when we did our pilot really hurt us. We applied for a grant from the United States Department of Justice. We won that grant, so we built out an app that we can use for lead. On the left, you see just the basics, 3-button. This was designed by a police officer, 3 buttons in order to divert somebody into the lead program. We think it'll be very helpful to get dozens or hundreds of officers working together. There is no way to share information other than having technology to share it. One person calling another person just isn't going to do it. The second thing, and I think Pete Espinoza already referred to this, staffing is key and relationships matter. The lead pilot, the lead method is a concept. If you don't assign the right people, it won't work as well. So this is a picture of a couple officers. Officer Zamora is in the middle. If it was not these officers working directly on this program, I can't tell you it would have been as big a success. Same thing with the case managers. In fact, our biggest hurdle in our lead pilot was that our case manager partners, our nonprofit service provider partners, were not ready to go at the beginning. It took 6 or 8 months for them to staff up, and that slowed everything down. So having the right staff is super important. The model itself doesn't solve anything. It's the people that are engaged in the model that hopefully will produce results. The third thing is lead exists in a diversion ecosystem. If you get rid of another program in order to run lead, like your homeless outreach programs, in Long Beach, we have the PAD program, we have a homeless court program, I think you're missing something. I think lead adds to this ecosystem. We were allowed to expunge cases from lead participants because we were already providing that service. If we had to end one program in order to start lead, it would not be as successful. I would look for cities and counties that are already equipped with the diversion ecosystem, and lead could fit into that quite well. So anyway, that's that. I told you I'd be very short. You've already heard about the Long Beach and LA model. I'm happy to answer any questions from boots on the ground. Our program was started by the unique thing about ours, and I don't know that there's any other LEAD program quite like this. We had 2 law enforcement partners, not 1. So Long Beach Police Department, LA County Sheriffs, and we had 2 prosecuting agencies, the LA District Attorney's Office and the Long Beach City Prosecutor's Office. 4 offices that normally do not share information and data back and forth. It was essential for our LEAD pilot to be able to do that, which is why we decided that one of the most important things we could do in the future is to use technology so that we can share information about who's in the LEAD program. So if an officer comes across this person, they can reconnect them to their social worker. If the officer that comes by a month later doesn't know that that person's in LEAD, there's no way to reconnect them to their social worker. So technology is a big piece of it. But these are the lessons that we've learned from Long Beach during our pilot. We also are expanding LEAD citywide in Long Beach. Long Beach is obviously a large city, almost 500,000 people. And we're going to be having all the officers on patrol will have the ability to refer someone into LEAD going forward. Our second pilot, we're calling it LEAD 2.0, will not be done for another year or so. So we're going to be building out the ability to refer people into LEAD from all patrol officers, not just in North Long Beach. And that's it for my presentation.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everybody who gave a presentation. I was wondering if we could just start from really square one basics. Perhaps Ms. Shahane or Captain Diedrich, can you just explain what does LEAD really look like on the street? So an officer sees a situation and does what?
Yeah, I can start and Captain please chime in. So an officer sees somebody, before that happens, Brendan from the LEAD Bureau has come out and trained officers on LEAD. So that's like
I want to hear. I get that the training's important, buy-in's important, handoff's important, diversion's important, but what is it actually? Because this is I actually think that this is one of the most important problems with failing to expand LEAD is that people don't. There are a lot of sort of mushy words and training and handoffs but what does actually happen?
Yeah, Mike, I agree with you, Mike, that I need a step-by-step. And that last sort of a diagram by the city attorney sort of took us from arrest around.
I wouldn't even know, this is all pre-arrest stuff. That's the whole point of LEAD. So what happens on the street? What actually happens? So an officer sees a situation, goes up to the person and does what?
They make a determination if that person is appropriate for LEAD. Okay. And so it's officer discretion. They would say, they would offer the program to the participant, say there's this great program, I can link you with the case manager.
Right.
If the person says yes, case managers can respond in the field with a short
I'm just going to stop you right there. Yes, of course they can and all that. That's what I'm going to just interrogate a little bit about. What actually happens? So the officer comes and says, looks like you could be somebody who might be able to benefit from this program. I can hook you up with the program. The person says yes. Then what happens?
So it looks a little different in each site we have, and a lot of it is based on law enforcement preference.
Okay, so, well, what do you think is the best? What should happen?
The best form, what we call a warm handoff. And what we do is we have designated times. So like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Case managers are available. Law enforcement knows that. If they come across somebody during those times, there's somebody on standby that's like close to that jurisdiction. That's also why our geography is relatively small. They respond usually 15, 20 minutes tops. So
when you say that they respond, I'm sorry, the police officer calls the case manager and says,
I have a LEAD referral.
Come out here. And then the case manager then comes out to the scene.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's super helpful. I think that's sort of concrete. Captain Diedrich, is that basically the way that things work as you see things? Just mechanically, the immediate intervention?
Yes, and that's the key to it, is that immediate intervention to where the case manager responds. Because what we found is if you say, okay, you want to do the program, you qualify for the program, today's Monday, but we're going to get you an appointment on Wednesday, you have just failed. Yeah. So it has to be an immediate handoff right here, right now. they're ready to go. And so they need to have the handoff immediately.
So the caseworker has to come to the location.
Yes.
And Mr. Cox, I see you nodding your head along with. And is that the way that, and perhaps this is a question for Dr. Mom, is that the way, my understanding is that's not the way that most LEAD programs actually work, or am I incorrect? Do case managers so Mr. Cox may correct me, case managers actually come to the scene in all LEAD programs? Is that the definition of LEAD?
So our best practice would be that a warm handoff happens and that, yes, a case
I
manager.
appreciate that it's the best practice, but is it actually happening?
Yes.
And
Yes.
Dr. Mom, is that correct?
Certainly what happened in the California and Seattle context, but I'm not as familiar with other contexts, especially more recent programs.
So it does happen. I'm sorry. So it did happen in California and Seattle?
Right.
Yeah. All right.
We provide technical assistance to the overwhelming majority of LEAD projects across the country. So yes.
And it's limited to these basically business hours for whatever the service providers can do it. Is that that's
so yes, it's very difficult to do LEAD 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for a lot of different reasons. Most of the reasons are because of the fact that the case managers, they are working in a fashion where they're building a relationship with an individual and then connecting to other services.
No, I understand. You don't need to explain why. I mean, it makes perfect sense. I understand why. All right, but that is a constraint.
But there are referrals that can happen outside of those hours, and there are times that referrals happen without a warm handoff.
Got it. I don't mean to dominate the conversation. Are there other committee members' questions?
I have a question for Long Beach, and you just mentioned the data and information sharing between multiple agencies, which is kind of a historically hard thing to do. Is it because everyone was using the app and you could just log in, or were there MOUs and agreements, or like how did that look in practice?
We didn't have the app for our pilot, so we're using it for the restart of LEAD, but it's extremely important. And to go back to the last question about how someone gets referred into services, we didn't have case managers at our disposal who could drop everything and run out when there's a referral. So we, in advance, organized certain Saturdays or certain dates. Case managers will be available between this date and this date for referral. But then once somebody gets referred in and they do an intake, we have information on who's in the LEAD program now. It takes a while to get housing. It takes there's a relationship. Sometimes it takes weeks or months for a person to trust the case manager to get off the streets. Meanwhile, that person is still living by the Los Angeles River or underneath a freeway overpass. So sharing information with other officers that are not part of LEAD, so that they know that this person has a case manager, gives that police officer the ability, instead of citing a new officer, citing or arresting this person because they don't know that they're in LEAD, it gives them the option of connecting them to their original case manager. So it gives them the ability to do something they never could do before. If they have the technology and the information, they could reconnect them to their LEAD case manager. That's why we developed the app. So the app was not used in the first pilot. After the first pilot, we decided it's really almost impossible to do, or very difficult to do, without having the ability for folks that are involved in LEAD to share information. So the police are sharing it among themselves so that they know who to connect back to services. And we also added to the app new services. So if you want to refer someone into services, we created a way for an officer to say, hey, I don't know anything about your LEAD program, but I want to refer this person into LEAD. And then a case manager follows up and we'll identify if that person is appropriate for LEAD.
So you're telling me the officer, is it like I would come in contact with somebody, refer them to LEAD, write their name down, send it to the sheriff as well, send it to the DA? How do they do that amongst themselves, in any kind of coordinated fashion?
If I could, I'll just show you the app again real fast. The buttons. Oops, why is it not sharing? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the new app on the left-hand side. It was developed by a California company. If that third button for resources, if you click on the resources button, the screen to your right will pop up, and it scrolls up, but an officer puts in very basic information and then hits submit. that goes to a case manager in my office. I have an MSW, a master's in social work, who has run shelters in the past and works very closely with our health department. That person will look to see, hey, are they already in LEAD? Because if they are, we're going to contact their LEAD approved coordinator, their case manager. If they're not already in LEAD, maybe this is a good time to try to connect them to LEAD. We have outreach workers from the city, healthcare workers. What we're trying to do is make it easy for officers to refer people to LEAD. If it's easy for them to do it, they'll do it. If it's hard for them to do it, they won't do it. They'll go to the citation and the arrest, they'll go to the tools that they know. So this is a new tool that allows police officers to easily refer someone, even if that officer doesn't know much about LEAD. All they have to do is put in some basic information. It goes to a social worker, and the social workers follow up to try to get that person into LEAD. But we still do the things that were mentioned every weekly or every other week. We still have case management conferences to do the follow-up on the individuals that are referred into LEAD. Not everyone will be appropriate for LEAD, but this is the most efficient way to refer people into LEAD.
Thanks.
Well, if I could just add, I think the app will really enhance things, but I also think that the biweekly meetings that happen between case managers, police, and prosecutors is one of the things that helps share. So just, Mr. Bryan, to your point, every LEAD participant signs a release of information. There's a memorandum of understanding between all the partners. Every participant signs a release of information, so case managers can share information back to police and prosecutors with what they're doing, because LEAD is voluntary. Somebody doesn't have to take part in LEAD. So they can share information with what that person's doing. And then LEAD case managers are actually working out on the street. So there are times they lose track of folks, but they're actually out working in the street, engaging with people with where they're at too. So they're also engaging with folks with wherever they're ultimately residing, where they're at.
So this makes a ton of sense for obvious reasons, and I gather that everybody here is supporters. I guess my question, and I want to direct it to Captain Diedrich, is how connecting people with services, police officers, I assume they do that kind of every day as part of ordinary course of business. How is LEAD different from ordinary course of business, or particularly the homeless services program that you work on? Why is it different?
Well, I think LEAD done properly brings a conclusion. Like right now with the homeless outreach team, we work with our outreach partners, and we work with, I think we have 800 collaborative partners right now. One, I think the successes seen in LEAD allows the deputy, when they see that person is getting help, one, there's a follow-up component to it, as Mr. Cox just mentioned. If you want to make deputies buy into a program, and you show that a man they found in the riverbed is now getting all the care that they need, they've been triaged properly, they're now healthy and thriving, you've started a fire that could be huge. And so with the LEAD program, they get that reciprocity where they get that information back, as he said, because of the waivers. So the information's flowing back and forth.
So let me just make sure I understand correct. So before I do that. So in your homeless outreach services program right now, outside of LEAD, what happens when an officer approaches somebody who might otherwise, the same type of situation that a LEAD officer might encounter? Do they not offer them support services? I mean, what are the...
Sure. It's just not through the LEAD program, but like I said, we have over 800 collaborative partners.
Right. So you refer...
we refer them, and then our homeless outreach team, the civilian partners, if it's a mental health issue, because we also have our MET team with them, the MET team would take over. If it's
What's MET?
Abuse issue, MET is our mental evaluation team.
Okay, so they refer to the mental health services. So that sounds very much like LEAD. You're saying that the big difference is that you don't get the return feedback on...
Well, I would say it's not. It doesn't have the formality of LEAD, where LEAD has, all these built-in things. That would be more of a buffet style, where it's, what piece and pull, but it doesn't have the formality of LEAD, where everything's in one shop. It's piecemealing it. And so I think literally taking what we have on that side, while we do have LEAD going on, I think it's at East LA and South LA to a degree, allowing LEAD to be a bigger component of this takes this current work being done, like what Mr. Halbert put in Long Beach. You have that ecosystem, and what the host team's doing is in that ecosystem. If you add LEAD, I think the successes of that, will be multiplied off the charts.
It seems like you're saying
piecemeal.
It seems like the formal structure of lead, the training, the buy-in, that's all very important. Ms. Shane, what were you going to add here?
Oh, may I add one more thing?
Of course, and then
with lead, you also have accountability. And so when you have the proper number of case managers, you have this accountability from A to Z. With how we are piecemealing it, I would say there is a lack of accountability maybe at the end, because the deputies, we might not know where someone goes. We're just trying to get them help. With what we're doing now is we know they didn't go to jail. They went somewhere else. With lead, you get this back and forth, this ebb and flow. And so when you insert this into that ecosystem, I think we see a paradigm change in Los Angeles County.
Ms. Shane?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think one thing about lead that's a little different is we're really trying to focus on the people who are not engaging in anything else. So it might be the folks that like Captain Diedrich's team sees and they try to refer them to services and they're like, nope, I'm good, I'm going to stay here, but they're getting arrested over and over again. And so the lead model is really intended to get those people that are just almost like saying no to everything else. And the ones that, I think many of the other services are lighter touch. And so because lead is so intensive, the caseloads are smaller, we ask, and to Captain's point, we that accountability with case managers, every 2 weeks we're meeting. So law enforcement is like, have you been out there and seen that person? What's happening? So they continue to go out and engage in a way that I think maybe, to no fault of other services, they have caseloads sometimes of 100 people. They can't just kind of keep going out there to try and engage that person and build that relationship to try and get them to start making changes. So
I assume that makes perfect sense. I assume that they're basically the same service providers, are they? They're just funded and by different, or are lead service providers different than the typical service providers that they are different?
Yeah, so
when you start a program, let's say you start a program in San Francisco, I live in San Francisco, I'm zooming in from San Francisco. So you start a whole new agency that does the lead services. I understand the police department's already in place. So the service providers, or do you go to currently existing service providers and try to get them in? I don't know who should answer this question. Everybody's nodding their head.
It's really trying to find a community-based agency that has case managers isn't the right term. Unfortunately, that's what we started with and that's what we stick with. But it's really trying to get a community-based agency that has street-based case coordinators that can go out and really build a relationship with somebody and get to know them and figure out what they're ready to do. So it's not, although they're a service provider, they're not just saying, hey, here's a service available for you. Do you want that? They're really taking the time to get to know somebody. They may spend.
No, I hear you. My only. And I think that's part of the problem here is if you go to a service provider currently.
This is the difference with lead though. This is completely different. This is the different aspect of lead. Lead is not just trying to connect somebody to say, do you want treatment? Here's treatment. Do you want housing? Here's housing. A lead case manager might not even talk about what service the person wants for a month with the person. If that person's not ready to talk about that, because they might be having a cup of coffee with them every day to sit there and figure out where this person's been for the last 20 years.
So it's okay. Let me understand and make sure. I think that if you went to different service organizations, they would say, we get to know our clients, we get to know people we find appropriate. So it's, I'm sure that, and there are differences. So, but you're saying that there's a special training that goes into the service, in addition to special training goes for the police officers. I think we've covered that area. Special training that goes into the service provider piece as well. But you use existing service providers who are already basically doing some of this work, maybe not in the specific way, organized in the specific way that lead works, but already basically doing this work. They get special training that, as Mr. Halbert says, are now coordinated with all the different agencies, with the police department, with the DAs and public defenders in a more coordinated way. But it's
we try to find folks that are fluent in harm reduction work, who really are more street-based harm reduction fluent people.
Now, as I hope that all of you guys are aware, just so you know, we are a body that merely recommends things to the legislature. If we had magic wands, we would be in a different situation. With the exception of Assemblymember Bryan, he actually gets a real vote. We just, try to encourage him and his colleagues.
Also, wish I had a magic wand, though, just to be clear.
I'll put it on the list. Let me get that. But in particular, our jurisdiction is the penal code, and it sounds, I'm hearing a lot of, this is a budget issue. We need more money. We need more funding. We need more training. We need more services. You might be surprised, but almost everybody who comes before our committee says something similar. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't need more help in this area. I'm curious if there are specific recommendations to the criminal code or that are more along those lines that you think might be helpful. In particular, Ms. Shaheen, I heard you in your presentation, I think right around the time that I cut you off, you were saying to expand there's a list, my understanding of the lead is that there's a list of penal code violations that make somebody eligible, and that you would want to expand that list. Is that correct? Let me just start there.
Yeah, and I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody knows better, but that list is specific to pre-arrest diversion. And so, yeah, our experience is like, to Brendan's point, like social contact is like really what's being used the most, but there are law enforcement officers who are asking for diversion opportunities for things outside of that. Like, I mean, especially here in LA, honestly, for citations, which has surprised me. Because, sometimes it feels like that might help move somebody or engage somebody that, hasn't before. So I guess that's one thing that's been coming up in LA is opportunity to have more diversion.
Mr. Cox, I guess maybe I'll point it to you. Perhaps in California, other jurisdictions, are there areas that you've seen where the penal code in particular can be used with putting the money issue aside to leverage LEAD more effectively?
Yeah, well, what we've looked at is the recognition that when LEAD started, it was really based on a drug offense or a sex worker offense. And what we've done is we've really realized that it can be looked at and crimes that are driven by addiction, mental health, poverty, and homelessness, and realizing that, yeah, we're not looking at violent offenses, but property offenses, things like larcenies, trespassing, even burglaries, those kind of things that are driven by addiction, mental health, poverty, those can really be there. And what we usually say is don't tie a jurisdiction's hands by necessarily naming them, but really do an assessment of what's happening in your community and looking at what makes sense to actually be able to make those diversions. And if you want to then make exclusionary criteria to say, hey, no, gunpoint robberies aren't going to be things we're going to divert with LEAD, that's not a problem. And at the end of the day, those social contact referrals don't have to have any exclusionary criteria because of the fact it's not named by a crime.
Am I correct that in every LEAD program, the initial discretion is by the police officer? So even if it's the least serious of the crimes that we're talking about, let's imagine some minor drug crime, if the police officer says this person is not good for LEAD, then they don't offer it, period, no matter if they're eligible or not.
Correct.
And I guess I'm curious, why would we have any then exclusion for crime if a police officer thinks this person would be good for LEAD?
It's a valid argument.
All right. Captain Diedrich, I'm just curious from your perspective, would there be any circumstances where, or are there currently circumstances where your officers go, I'd really like to get this guy to LEAD, he really needs it, but I can't because the rules say that he's excluded?
Not that I know of, but I think to both points, and without going, I think we can get more buy-in. That's one issue, but I think looking at the expansion of criteria, I don't have the list in front of me, so I apologize. I don't know currently in front of us what the laws are. I think from what I remembered in the past, there was some expansion that could be done, and then I think it's just going to lead to the training part, but obviously we don't want to add things that aren't appropriate, right? But I think with the current list, which I don't know what it is, I think it's based on all the narcotics things and those. I don't see that we have many deputies choosing not to do LEAD when a participant wants to.
Got it. Mr. Hubbard?
When we started our lead pilot, the prosecutors in the district attorney's office and in my office sat down to go over the list of qualifying offenses because law enforcement wanted some bright lines. These are the things to look for. It wasn't unfettered discretion where an officer could refer any case into lead. And we developed a list of charges that a person would be likely eligible for lead, subject to verification, but they were generally drug possession, prostitution related offenses. There was one that was possession for sales of drugs, but only if it was a very small amount. So there were just a handful of things that we agreed to in advance, and that made it easy for law enforcement to go through the list and say, oh, this might be a good lead case, because they want bright line rules to the extent we can give them. So that was a lot of what we did at the front end. My recollection is the penal code language that's in there now was related to the pilot programs in San Francisco and in LA. So I don't know that. I'd have to go back and look at it, but I will do that. And if there's any suggestions for language changes, I'll send that to you. I just wasn't prepared to talk about the penal code sections today. I think those only address the pilot. So we have expanded it in Long Beach from beyond what we were doing in the pilot.
Got it. Dr. Malm and then Captain Diedrich.
I'm working on evaluations of other lead type programs as well. And I know that further downstream actors like public defenders and case managers as well often talk about barriers with wobblers. So charges that could be misdemeanors or could be felony are quite often being pushed up to felony, and that would make it in many instances not eligible for lead diversion. But that also has a downstream effect for failure to appear and other administrative offenses when they're not eligible for a PC 977, which is a waiver of attendance at court. And that can lead to much more administrative offenses, fines and fees and so on, which is probably a little bit, it pertains to the rest of your discussion today as well, because you can only use a 977. So you waive your attendance in court for a misdemeanor charge.
So no wobblers are eligible, is that what you're saying?
Not if they're being charged as a felony, no.
Well, right, but we're talking about something well before charging. This is just in the police officer's discretion. So if it is the police officer could decide to wobble it down to a misdemeanor.
Yes, they could.
All right, and we need the police officer buy-in at that instance, regardless, because even if they say it's an absolute 100%, million% misdemeanor, I still don't think lead is appropriate. It doesn't matter, right? They still can say
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Captain Diedrich.
And I would just say to that point, and I agree with everything she just said, is we want to make sure that we don't put our deputies in a position to where making it a decision where someone says, why did you do this? So if there's language there where the deputy actually said, you know, this candidate's good for diversion, but it's outside of those rules, now they put their career in jeopardy, that effect can have a ripple effect to have detrimental effects to the program. So I think our language and whatever codification happens needs to be clear so it empowers them to make those decisions, not puts them at risk for making those decisions.
I think that's a really interesting point. Would there, in your opinion, would there be some offenses that you think should be required to be offered lead? Meaning, so police officer has no choice, simple drug possession, they are required to offer lead, or do you think that the police officer should retain the discretion to arrest?
I think that would require additional conversation. To really vet it through, maybe with a panel like this, and really go over the things, because when you require it, what if it's not applicable in that time? So
it's a catch-22. I'm trying to address the concern that you said that the officer wants to feel they're doing the right thing, they're doing the thing that the legislature and everybody's asked them to do, and don't want to be holding the bag at the end of the day.
Right.
But at the same time, we want to maintain discretion for somebody who's out in the street, who's facing the real life situation. And that's a tricky balance to reach.
Question, Mike?
Rick, go ahead.
I was just wondering, what some of the research we looked at in preparation for this panel showed that in California, there were over 130,000 misdemeanor arrests for drug offenses last year. It's the highest arrest category. And LEAD, while it sounds like a great program, addresses a very small proportion of that huge problem. And so I just like your guys' take on whether LEAD is a worthy investment for California for the legislature to make when it's only addressing in LA County. Erica, you mentioned 1,000 folks of the 130,000 people in the state who are getting arrested for these minor offenses. Why is LEAD going to help make a dent in that? Why is it appropriate to kind of focus on that population? And can it kind of be expanded to impact even more people?
Yeah, I want to just second that. How has this scaled? Because everybody said that the ideal model is this warm handoff where you're going to have social workers or case managers or however we wanted to call them rushing out to the scene. And if we're going to do that 100,000 times a year in California, that seems like a lot, overwhelming. I'll just say that word. So Ms. Shaheen and then Mr. Cox, I was wondering if both of you guys could address how does this realistically scale?
Yeah, I mean, I might say to the point of, that Mr. Owen made about the misdemeanor drug offenses. I think for the way I think of LEAD is that LEAD is best equipped to help those that are getting like hundreds of those offenses. So really the high utilizers. And so if we can take those folks out of the system and get them the intensive care, then there might be other strategies for, you know, like there's different people that are getting those kinds of charges. And so there might be other strategies to address that issue in general. And then, yeah, I don't know, Brendan, if you have other thoughts.
No, that makes a lot of sense. We've all in other panels, other times we've heard about the problem of the high utilizers, and that seems like that's the main target. And Mr. Cox, the scaling question.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it scales differently in each place. We are looking at the high utilizers. We're not looking at first and second time offenders. So it's not going to catch somebody who's being arrested for the first or second time. However, we are also trying to change the culture of arresting people for low-level drug offenses. So we're also trying to capture by getting to other officers, not just having a couple officers that might be utilizing LEAD, but also the other officers within that department to say, why are we making the arrest for this? It doesn't make sense anymore. And I actually do think like Seattle is a good example of that, where Seattle has now got citywide LEAD. They're doing it LEAD citywide, and their drug arrests have basically gone away. So people aren't arresting people for drugs. They still have other issues, don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, when you look at their drug arrests, they aren't incarcerating or arresting people for drugs anymore.
And are there, so I wish we don't have obviously anybody from Seattle here. I used to live there. I have very fond memories of that city. Do people know, so drug arrests are going down. Do we have a better sense of, do we have a sense about whether that is actually improving people's lives? Are they getting into treatment? Are they getting into housing? Are there fewer overdoses? I don't know what other metric one would measure.
Yeah, I mean, I just came from there. I mean, they have their challenges, and we can certainly schedule if you'd like, as a follow-up with a group of folks from Seattle LEAD and that are also doing parallel programs, some programs you guys have done as well for housing that have actually started to make some improvements along those lines.
Dr. Mom, do you have any results or any insights there?
Oh, no, I don't, other than to second your, I love Seattle. It's a great city.
Can I ask another question about funding?
Yes, of course.
As Captain Diedrich, you talked about the importance of funding for the officers, and I just wondered if you could speak more to kind of what that funding, why that funding is needed, what it's used for. I think there's a, you know, if the state were to offer more funding, should the state specify whether the funding should go to kind of these public community organizations that are providing the social services, or what part of the funding should go to the police services, and how can, or should that be left to counties to decide? How should that be handled?
Well, I think, I mean, looking at all the different models that I'm involved in, from the homeless outreach team to LEAD to MET, I think when you see funding that's specific and specified that it shall be used for this purpose, you see a better use of those funds. Like at my bureau, if you have special funding saying these deputies shall do this, when we have another problem come up, those deputies are not diverted then to that other problem. They stay with the LEAD program. So I think when you have funding for a program such as LEAD, if it's specified for this program and it shall be used, you see an 100% efficiency of the resource versus we have a serial burglary problem. So now the LEAD deputies are taken off of that and they're taken to another effort on the department. So here, when they're specifically funded for that, you get 100% return on your investment. So I think as you look at building whatever program that is with, obviously with us, it's at a large scale in different geographic regions, is the specificity of that funds, I think from experience, really goes to success. Because if you gave me money and didn't say it's, has to be used for the LEAD program, those 2 deputies could be doing counterfeit and piracy enforcement because they just funded the deputies. I want the money to say LEAD deputies. So nobody, if I disappear tomorrow, nobody can take those deputies and put them somewhere else. And so to me, specificity is with our mental evaluation team, 100%. They don't do any other work but that. Our homeless outreach team, the ones that are funded, they only do that work. And so I've seen, 1, they're invested in the work. 2, their dedication to duty goes through the roof because they see it as an organizational obligation. And then they want to have success to their clients that they're serving in the community, as well as their community partners.
Thank you. We're running towards the end of this panel time. I want to keep us on schedule, but Assemblymember Bryan, I want to get to you before we break.
Yeah, just two questions, or one clarifying question and then another question. Just to be clear, cities and counties and jurisdictions could earmark money from the budget increases they do every year specifically for LEAD anyway of existing.
I had a similar question. So is this a state issue, or are these or is that basically what you're asking at the local levels? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I'm suggesting yes, that the state doesn't necessarily have to offer a new bucket for LEAD, that existing resources or any increases that are already happening in jurisdictions across the state, the local city councils, local jurisdictions could earmark specific portions of that budget for LEAD would be my first question. And my second is really just about officer kind of advancement in retention. If I'm one of the LEAD deputies, is there still room for promotion and to still stay with LEAD and things like that? Or is it kind of a hole in the department's org chart where you're just over here siloed off? And so there's less of an incentive reason to even want to be a LEAD officer, for example.
Well, to your second question, so I was the lieutenant here at this bureau for 10 years, and I promoted and I stayed here as the captain. It's unusual that happens. So the LEAD deputies, the original 2, to answer your other question would be, they're still here. Although they're not formally part of LEAD, they're still in this bureau. They're on the homeless outreach team. They're still connected to LEAD. They don't want to leave. And so I've created a pathway to where if this would happen, they could be a sergeant here and stay and then lead the deputies on the LEAD team. So there is some opportunity, but organizationally, Assemblyman, usually you get transferred. So, but with our new leadership team, it looks like they're looking things through a clear lens that's able to, why are we taking this perfect thing and moving it to fleet services? And so I think that's why my voice is fairly strong within the organization because of my tenure, is saying, no, I don't want to lose this person. He has tremendous impact to the community for community health, community safety. And it appears now that we have an executive system that's listening. I can't promise it, but I do see a bright future when it comes to that.
To follow up on Assemblymember's initial question, though, this is the budgeting priorities within the Sheriff's Department. That's done within the Sheriff's Department and the Board of Supervisors, I presume. So it doesn't necessarily need to be state money. Of course, there are lots of competing interests for the money.
Right. And to that point, I'll be very brief. I believe, so in my 32 years, I believe that our personnel, our levels have been decimated to we're at a level that we've never been at before. So I know that we are so short. Like I believe some of the patrol stations are at 68 to 70% of minimum staffing, which I've never heard of that. So I do believe that there needs to be if we're going to say, why do we elevate LEAD over something else? There has to be, the political will. I know we have the executive support, but a political will from the state or the assemblyman. And as we go forward saying, we want to prioritize this and we will help fund, it might help push them that way because there's many competing interests for personnel right now. And we are, honestly, I think a lot of times law enforcement has kind of said, oh, we need people in the past, and it might not have been authentic. Today it is. And so I think to prioritize LEAD, and I think I can make the argument within the organization that LEAD deputies doing this right takes a burden off of those patrol stations, enhances public safety, and actually reduces crime, reduces the necessity for calls for service. I'm willing to make that argument, but I think having the state and the assemblyman and those committees say we want to prioritize this would give maybe the sheriff, and I can't speak for him yet, maybe give them the impetus to do it, but they have a lot of competing interests right now.
All right, this has been super helpful and interesting. Thank you all. No good deed goes unpunished, so I'm sure we will be back in touch with you all in terms of follow-up questions. If you have follow-up for us, specific recommendations in particular that you don't think that we've reached, please do keep in touch with us. I think this is a very promising. We want to support as much as we can. Before we take a break, Justice Moreno.
Mike, I had a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's been a long time since I was in the trial court, and a lot of this is somewhat new to me. You know, the initial question I asked, I don't think has been really answered. The city attorney Halbert had a schematic from arrest, and we went into pre-arrest. I mean, I thought it looked like an interesting schematic, and maybe you can take 30 seconds or a minute just to explain. I'd like to know what the path to success is in terms of the Project LEAD program, which sounds like a great program, but I'm still lost in the details, and I just want to get the big picture of the force.
Do you want me to share that slide again?
Yeah, I mean, that was my initial question that hasn't been answered yet.
That was my fault. I hijacked things.
It was your fault.
Hopefully you can see this. On my screen, it's slightly cut off, but this is just the sequential intercept model. Some of you have probably seen this on other occasions, but you can do diversion at many different steps. This is the law enforcement step, the initial contact from law enforcement. Once the case goes to court, if it goes to court, there's an opportunity to divert a person. The judges can issue as a condition of probation treatment, and then reentry when someone leaves custody and is out in the community. There's an opportunity to I guess it's not diversion, it's reentry or alternative sentencing. So the reason I mentioned where LEAD fits as this entry level, right when the law enforcement touches and makes contact with that individual, there are a lot of benefits, but it doesn't outweigh, in my mind, the benefits of jail ordered diversion. We should still have jail ordered diversion. We should still have reentry services. But here's the benefit of doing it earlier in time when law enforcement interacts with a person. Right from that very first point, you're saving money downstream from having to arrest the person. It costs money to arrest and do that initial detention. It costs judges. You were a judge, Your Honor. Certainly, you know how expensive the court system is. So LEAD, I conceptualize it this way. A person who's in court, who picks up a new case, at that first time that the law enforcement makes contact with this person, first time this month maybe, but that person may have cases here. I would not exclude them simply because they have a case in court. If we can get them into LEAD, we can actually shift the costs from this part of the circle to earlier to the law enforcement contact. So ecosystem, in my mind, LEAD should not, in my mind, supplant other activities such as reentry services, alternative sentencing, pre-filing diversion, but this is a pre-booking diversion program. And by adding muscle at the pre-booking diversion stage and adding resources and adding case managers who are there to jump in and help out, I think you're adding a lot to the overall ecosystem. That was my point.
Okay. Yeah, that's very helpful. Gives me the big picture.
I'd be happy to send this to you and follow up with you offline and share more with you if you wish. Happy to do that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It seems like you're saying that there are some cases that are pretty obvious from the outset that they're going to end up in community services, in the community services piece. So why don't we jump to that right away if we can?
Yeah, wherever you can assist them, you have to be ready to assist at every step of the sequential interstep model. And that first step, the law enforcement piece, has been lacking over time. That's where LEAD comes in. LEAD really provides muscle and resources to that first intercept opportunity when there's contact from the officer to the individual on the street. In my mind, that's my view of it.
No, that makes a ton of sense. This has been super helpful to me. I hope everybody on the panel. Thank you all again. As I said, I'm sure we'll be in touch, and please be in touch with us if you have recommendations for us. I'd like to take a 10 or 12-minute break now. So actually, let's reconvene at 11:15, and we'll be back for our next panel. Thank you all.